I'm really glad you've joined me today for the latest learning in the True Path Thrive Tuesday series. In this session, we'll explore energetic boundaries and the costs of leaking your power. This important but often overlooked topic affects our lives daily. I want to let you know that this is a small portion of a much bigger discussion. Take a moment to arrive fully wherever you're listening from. If we haven't met before, I'm Tara Palazzolo, the founder of True Path CO and the creator of the True Path framework. Through my own rebuilding, I discovered something essential. We do not change through force. We change when we understand how our system actually works. My goal is not to fix anyone, because you're not broken. I help people recognize patterns to rebuild their inner architecture and lead from truth. While this framework is designed from my perspective as a woman, individuals of all identities are welcome. My mission is simple: to guide you back to yourself with clarity, integrity, and sovereignty, because these concepts have no boundaries. Before we begin, I want to invite you to do a brief landscape check. If you were to pause and look at your life holistically right now, where do you feel most drained? It doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Even a quiet, consistent signal can count. I encourage you not to judge or try to solve it when it comes up. Feel free to pause the video or audio here if you need more time. When you're ready, we'll continue. When people pause with this question, certain themes tend to surface. Sometimes what comes up looks very specific: money, a relationship, your job, a deadline, taxes, even a conversation you're avoiding. And while these things are very real and they matter, they often are not the source of the drain. They're the place where it becomes most visible. So instead of focusing on the situation itself, I want to zoom out and name a few patterns that often sit underneath. Over responsibility often sounds like, if I do not handle this, it will fall apart. It's the habit of carrying more than what's actually yours, emotionally, mentally, energetically, often without you realizing you're doing it. You might feel responsible for others' reactions, for keeping things smooth, or for even anticipating needs before they're spoken. But over time, it quickly drains energy because the system never gets to rest. Emotional overfunctioning is when you're doing the emotional labor from everybody else in the room. You track moods, manage tone, and even smooth tension. Often this looks like being good with people or highly intuitive, and these skills are very real. But when they're running automatically without consent, they become an energy leak. Being available without recovery. This one is subtle. It's not just about being busy, it's about being reachable, mentally, emotionally, and energetically, without true recovery built in. You respond quickly, you stay open, you hold space, but there's no corresponding pause, no moment where energy is actually restored. Saying yes before checking capacity. This does not always come from people pleasing. Sometimes it comes from habit or momentum or a nervous system that equates saying yes with safety. The yes comes first. Often the body check-in comes later, if at all. Adjusting yourself instead of adjusting the structure. This pattern shows up when something is not working, and instead of changing the container, you change yourself. You might push harder, become more flexible, silence your needs, and you adapt. Rather than asking, is this structure sustainable or does it still serve me? The question becomes, how can I make myself fit into this? This is one of the most common and least recognized energy leaks, because from the outside, it looks like resilience. These signals tell us where energy is already being spent. What you noticed may or may not have been reflected here, and that's okay. It is simply a snapshot of the themes that tended to arise when the question was asked. But what matters is not whether your experience matches, but what you noticed and how it felt once you noticed it. We're using all of this as context, a single moment in time, not as a conclusion or a label. Energetic boundaries are not rules that you set or walls that you build. They're not about being stricter, clearer, or better at saying no. They function less like enforcement and more like a relationship. Specifically, energetic boundaries are the relationship between your capacity, your consent, and your ability to choose. That distinction matters. Because when we misunderstand the structure, we tend to assume the problem is willpower, discipline, or communication, when what is actually missing is containment, the structure that allows movement without costing you. When energetic boundaries are aligned, they show up as momentum without urgency, decisions that don't require self-erasure, interaction or effort that is sustainable rather than depleting of your energy. Energetic boundaries are meant to support you, never to drain you. Most people think that they have a boundary problem when they actually have a relationship problem with their own capacity and power. And until that relationship changes, no singular rule will ever be enough. Before we go any further, I want to name something clearly. Nothing in this conversation is meant to soften or override a hard boundary that are required for safety. If you're living in or have been in toxic, abusive, or destabilizing situation, including situations that require no contact, limited contact, or strict distance, these boundaries are valid and necessary. Energetic boundaries are not about forcing openness where safety is not present. It's not about negotiating with harm. What we're talking about here applies to spaces where engagement is possible, not where protection is required. If you're currently in a situation where you're mentally, emotionally, or physically unsafe, this learning is not a substitute for professional or legal support. If there is active harm, threat, or danger, please seek care from a licensed therapist, a trusted professional, or local law enforcement, depending on what's appropriate for your situation. I want to look at what energetic boundaries are, one piece at a time. First, energetic boundaries are meant to support you. They're not here to alienate you from people, to fix you, or act as a form of control. Healthy energetic boundaries feel supportive, not isolating. The ability to relate differently to life events rather than fixing them. With energetic boundaries, you can stay present with a situation without taking responsibility for resolving it. Energetic boundaries are designed to support sustainability. This means your body and your emotional system are considered to be part of the equation. If something is working but leaving you exhausted, anxious, or depleted, it's actually not sustainable. Boundaries help you notice this earlier before burnout, resentment, or collapse sets in. Opportunities that have movement and growth without self-betrayal. Energetic boundaries do not stop growth. They prevent self-betrayal. I like to think of energetic boundaries as a containment system, like a checking account. Every interaction, commitment, or demand creates either an energetic deposit or an energetic withdrawal. Deposits might be rest, a nourishing connection, creativity, or even movement. Withdrawals might be overgiving, urgency, or emotional labor without recovery. Boundaries help you notice where withdrawals are outpacing deposits so you can adjust before the system goes into overdraft. Finally, energetic boundaries are not fixed or permanent. They are not rules you set once and follow forever and forget about it. Your capacity changes. Healthy boundaries adapt with you. I want to take a moment to clarify what energetic boundaries are not. Many of the behaviors we associate with having strong boundaries are not actually boundaries at all. They're protection responses. Let me walk through a few examples. Rigidity. This often shows up when someone has overextended for a long time. It sounds like, this is my rule and I will not bend. Rigidity is not about clarity, it's about bracing. It's the nervous system trying to create safety by eliminating variability. Control is another behavior that often gets mistaken for boundaries. This can look like managing outcomes, micromanaging details, or trying to stay one step ahead of everyone else. Control usually develops when trust has been eroded, either trust in others or trust in yourself. But controlling the environment is not the same as being in the right relationship with your energy. Energetic boundaries do not rely on controlling external conditions. They rely on internal consent and choice. Walls can feel like shutting down, shutting out, or pulling back completely. Sometimes walls are necessary in the moment of a real threat. But when walls become the default, they cut off not just what drains you, they also cut off what nourishes you. Rest restores, and withdrawal isolates. Performance strength looks like holding it together, staying composed, or being the strong one. It can look very competent on the outside. But inside, energy is being overridden in order to maintain an image of control or capability. When protection overrides alignment. Our nervous system is incredibly fast at protecting us. It's built for survival, not for alignment, fulfillment, or long-term sustainability. So when something new begins to challenge an old sense of safety, the system often steps in before we're even aware of it. This is the moment where alignment gets interrupted, not because you're making a bad choice, but because protection is doing its job. Let me name what this often looks like in real life. When external doubt begins to echo internally. At first, the doubt does not even feel like yours. It sounds like expectations, standards, reactions you're anticipating, what other people might think, what they might need, and what they might expect you to be able to handle. Over time, that outside noise gets internalized. Once it does, it starts to drive decisions. And that's where the cost begins to accumulate. This shows up when rest feels threatening or you're perceived to being reliable, dependable, or the one who's able to carry those around you. You might notice that feeling tired feels more familiar, as if you're giving 100% to your situation, be it work, relationship, or something else. This feels safer, allowing you to be in more control than slowing down in a way that you've never been allowed to. So the system chooses what it recognizes. It's not self sabotage, it's pattern memory. When external doubt echoes internally here, it sounds like, I should be able to handle this, or I don't need any help. Instead of adjusting the structure, you push yourself to meet the expectation even when it costs you. Alignment gets delayed in the favor of proving resilience. Overgiving replaces clarity. In moments like this, clarity often disappears. Instead of pausing to check in what is actually aligned, the system moves into overgiving, doing more, offering more, explaining more. Action replaces discernment, because doing something, anything, feels safer than stopping to feel. You override the signal due to perceived urgency. You feel the signal, fatigue, hesitation, resistance, but urgency reframes it as inconvenience. I'll deal with this later. This is not the right time. I just need to get through this. Protection has decided speed matters up more than alignment. Protection keeps you functioning. Alignment is what lets you thrive. There is a cost, not necessarily as punishments, but they act as feedback, and that's what we're going to look at next. The cost of leaking your power is not always obvious. It rarely shows up all at once. More often, it shows up gradually, spread across different areas of your life in ways that are easy to dismiss or normalize. Let me make this practical. Time and energy leaks. These often look like your life quietly filling up with other people's needs. You're meaning to do something for yourself, a hobby, a creative project, movement, rest, and it keeps getting postponed. Not because you don't care about it, but because there's always something else that feels more urgent. You might have to run errands for somebody, helping somebody problem solve. Over time, your life becomes organized about what everybody else needs, and what restores you never quite gets a turn. Emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion often comes from being the default container. You're the person that people vent to, people rely upon, process with. You're supportive, empathic, present. But there's no reciprocity or recovery. You might tell yourself, this is just how relationships work. Decision fatigue can show up when your inner signals have been overridden for too long. You might notice second guessing, overthinking, difficulty even making small choices. Not because you're incapable, but because your system has learned that its signals are often ignored. When choice does not feel safe, every decision is heavy. Sometimes the cost shows up in the body. Digestive issues, chronic tension, headaches, autoimmune flare-ups. This is not because your body's failing you, it's because the body speaks when the signals are consistently ignored. The body is often the last place boundaries show up, but the most honest. Loss of self-trust. This happens gradually. You might stop listening to yourself because you already know what you're not going to honor with what you hear. You avoid situations where you know that you will not hold a boundary. You stay silent instead. Over time, that erodes confidence, not because you lack strength, but because your system has learned not to rely on you. And finally, there's reaction mode. When energy leaks are active, you're not orientating from a place of clarity, you're responding from pressure. When somebody pushes back against your needs, you might freeze or over-explain or suddenly explode. Sometimes you might even withdraw completely. And these are not personality flaws. These are signs of a system that's been managing too much without containment. All of these show that your power has been leaking in small, consistent ways, and your system's been compensating. The good news is leaks can be located, and what can be located can be repaired. Why ineffective boundaries occur. I want to spend a few minutes here because this really matters. When we talk about ineffective or leaking boundaries, it's very easy for people to classify this as, I did something wrong, or self-shame as I always give in. What we're really talking about is adaptation. Boundaries leak not because people are weak or unaware, but because their systems learn what was required to stay safe, connected, or employed. Most systems do not reward you for being well resourced, they reward you for being available. Workplaces, in particular, often value responsiveness over longevity, being reachable, being flexible, be willing just to handle it. Even job descriptions quietly reinforce this. So people learn very quickly that sustainability is optional, but availability is not. Roles learned early. Sometimes these patterns come from roles that we were given. Maybe you were expected to be responsible, to look after your siblings, or maybe be the one who handled things. You did not choose that role, but you became very good at it. The skills that once kept you safe do not automatically turn off just because you've grown up and you have new responsibilities. For a lot of people, boundaries were never modeled as something as flexible or mutual. It was modeled as overgiving. Parents who were exhausted but still showed up. Caretakers who always put others first. So the message absorbed was not, this is too much. It was, this is what love looks like. This is just what we do. Another major reason boundaries leak is the avoidance of uncomfortable emotions, both our own and other people's. Most of us were never taught how to stay present without discomfort. We were taught to how to make it go away and quickly. So when discomfort shows up, the system looks for relief, not truth. Let me explain what this looks like. Avoiding our own discomfort. Saying no can feel uncomfortable. Pausing can be uncomfortable. Letting somebody be disappointment can feel uncomfortable. In the end, we adjust ourselves. Not because the boundary is wrong, but because the feeling is unfamiliar or even intrusive. The relief is immediate. The cost, however, is delayed. We often override ourselves to prevent somebody else from feeling disappointed, frustrated, inconvenienced, or upset. We do this because their discomfort activates something in us. It might be the fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as selfish, difficult, or unkind. We compensate early. We soften, fix, and absorb. We carry the emotional weight so nobody else has to. So the system prioritizes emotional smoothing over energetic truth. The problem is that avoiding discomfort doesn't eliminate it, it just relocates it. Instead of disappointment being felt by somebody else for a moment, it becomes resentment, fatigue, or collapse inside your body. Instead of an honest conversation now, it becomes an emotional exhaustion later. In volatile environments, homes, workplaces, relationships, compliance often feels safer than resistance. It learns do not question, do not slow down, do not push back. Once upon a time, I worked in an environment where questioning unsafe behavior was discouraged. People knew something was wrong, but they were afraid to speak up, not because they were ignorant, but because their jobs were on the line. When I eventually left the environment, I spoke out, and I was able to hold a boundary where they felt they could not. Not because I was better, not because I was braver, simply because my circumstances changed. Keep in mind context matters. Nothing here means you failed. It means your system adapted efficiently to the conditions it was placed in. Energetic boundaries are not about eliminating discomfort. They're about learning which discomfort is yours to carry and what was never meant to be. Have you ever noticed that once you see something clearly, you cannot go back to seeing it the same way again? That's what this slide is naming, seeing the landscape differently. I want to zoom out for a moment and help you see this. When we talk about energetic boundaries, we're not talking about a single interaction or a single choice. We're talking about orientation. Most people are living inside protection-oriented pattern. In this pattern, availability is rewarded. Urgency sets the pace. Signals from the body or nervous system are treated like inconveniences, so the person adapts. They stretch, they override, they contort themselves to meet the demands of the environment. It is not because they lack boundaries, it's because protection is running the system. Energetic boundaries introduce a different orientation. Instead of asking, how do I keep up? The system begins asking, what is sustainable for me? Signals are no longer something to push through, they become information. Rest is not failure, limits are not selfish, and slowing down is not a threat. Over time, the environment begins to adjust. Conversations change, so do expectations, and even the structures that contain them. Not through force, but through consistency. Energetic boundaries are not about doing less, they're about orientating your life to the truth of your capacity. I want to pause here and set expectations clearly. Energetic boundaries are a big, expansive topic. They show up in your inner world, your relationships, your work, and your resources. And each of these areas could easily be its own full conversation. Internal or self boundaries. This is the relationship you have with your own capacity, needs, and signals. It includes things like listening to your body, noticing when you're tired, overwhelmed, or overextended. Internal boundaries are the foundation because every other boundary builds on this one. Next, family boundaries, present day. We're not going to go into deep ancestral or childhood work here. This is about current dynamics, how energy moves between you and your family members now. Then there's work boundaries. Work is one of the most common places energetic boundaries leak. And lastly, we will cover money boundaries. Money is just not financial, it's energetic. It carries themes of worth, safety, obligation, and pressure. Internal self boundaries. Before external boundaries can be held consistently, internal boundaries have to be created. They're not something you suddenly have, they're built slowly, layer by layer, often in response to what or was not modeled for us. And this matters because when people struggle with boundaries, it's rarely because they don't know what to do. It's because an internal structure was never given time to form. Internal boundaries are comprised of and dependent on several layers. At the base is identity. This is your sense of who you are, separate from what you provide, fix, manage, or endure. When I say identity here, I'm not necessarily talking about a story you consciously chose. For many, identity exists as an unspoken orientation rather than a narrative. If you've never sat down and thought, this is who I am, that does not mean that identity is absent. It means it's operating quietly in the background. When identity is mostly subconscious, it sounds like, I am the responsible one, I'm the strong one, I do not need help, I'm good at handling things. When somebody has done self-work, identity becomes more visible. It turns into a language. They might recognize, I have tied my worth to being useful. I was taught to be the emotional stabilizer. If identity is unclear, boundaries can feel unstable because saying no can feel like it's threatening to who you are and your internal belief system, especially if your identity was shaped around being helpful, reliable, or low maintenance. On top of identity comes values. Values help you decide what matters and what does not require your energy. Without values, everything feels equally important. When everything's important, capacity is ignored. Values are what allow internal identities to filter and not react. Self-trust is built through repetition. It grows when you notice your signals and respond to them. And it erodes when you constantly override yourself, especially due to guilt, fear of disappointing others, or discomfort with conflict. If you were taught that saying no was selfish or that others' emotions were your responsibility, self-trust takes time to rebuild. Lastly, confidence. It is not the starting point, it is the outcome. It emerges when identity is stable, values are clear, and self-trust has been repaired. This is why telling people to just be confident with boundaries rarely works. Confidence rests on infrastructure. Internal boundaries form to give infrastructure to external boundaries. If the internal structure is missing, external boundaries collapse under pressure. After internal boundaries, family boundaries are often the most emotionally charged and the most influential. Not because family relationships are inherently problematic or matter more, but because this is where many of our earliest patterns were formed. This is where belonging was negotiated, where roles were assigned, where emotional responsibility was learned. So family boundaries rarely start from a blank slate. They start from history. Family boundaries are shaped by roles that were assigned early and quietly carried forward. Who was expected to help? Who kept the peace? Who absorbed emotional weight? And who did not get to opt out? These roles often made sense at the time. This can refer to sibling or caretaker relationships. This can be partner relationships that change through death, separation, or divorce. But when these situations have changed, many of the roles were never updated, even though your life, capacity, and identity has changed. Another major factor here is emotional responsibility. Many people learned, or consciously or not, that other people's comfort, stability, and happiness was something for them to manage. So when boundaries are needed, guilt shows up very quickly. Not because the boundary is wrong, but because the system associates boundaries with disruption or loss of connection. Family boundaries are also heavily influenced by expectations both internally to the family and also through generational conditioning and societal conditioning. Expectations around availability, loyalty, caretaking, and hierarchy are often underlying currents. It can include what means to be a, quote, good child, partner, sibling, or parent. When these expectations go unexamined, they quietly override our internal boundaries. You may notice yourself saying yes before checking capacity, or feeling resentful without even knowing why. All of these are signals of energetic leakage, not relational failure. Family boundaries are not about cutting people off. They're about discerning what you can sustainably offer without betraying yourself in the process. And because these patterns are older, they take more patience to rewrite, not more force. After family, work boundaries are often the most influential because they're directly tied to safety and survival, like income, stability, security. When work is involved, boundaries stop feeling optional. They start to feel risky. As we discussed earlier, being reachable, responding quickly, and taking on just one more thing makes you valuable. Urgency becomes a marker of competence. Slowing down gets misinterpreted as disengagement. So people adapt and try to do more things quicker. They try to outpace their peers, anticipate business or management needs. This can be replying to emails after hours. Another major factor here is responsibility creep. Work responsibilities tend to expand gradually. A task becomes a role, a favor becomes an expectation, and then suddenly expectation becomes the norm. Often this happens without an explicit conversation. And because saying no can feel like it's threatening security, people absorb the expansion quietly. I want to pause on responsibility creep here for a moment because this is one of the most misunderstood boundary issues at work. Responsibility creep is often framed as accidental, but I want to be clear. Responsibility creep can also happen intentionally, and when it does, it's often disguised as opportunity, flexibility, or trust. I have two examples of intentional scope creep. One, during reorgs. A position is eliminated, someone moves to another department, or a manager leaves. The business needs do not decrease. But instead of redistributing the workload or restructuring roles, one person is asked, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, to absorb additional responsibilities on top of their existing job. This is load transfer, and it's often framed as temporary or an opportunity for somebody who's more junior, even when it quietly becomes permanent. The second example is job posting and hiring practices. You may see roles that claim to be multidisciplinary, fast-paced, or high impact. But when you actually read the description, what is being asked is not a healthy range. It's role compression disguised as flexibility. These postings often collapse multiple distinct job families into one seat. Each one of these roles have different success metrics, different cognitive demands, different risk profiles, different compensation bands. When they're collapsed into one role, the issue is not that the person cannot keep up. The issue is that the role was never designed to be sustainable. When responsibility creep is intentional, holding boundaries requires more than self-awareness. It requires structural discernment. If a role requires constant override to succeed, it's not a personal boundary failure. It's a design problem. Work boundaries are also deeply tied to identity. If your sense of worth is connected to being reliable, capable, or indispensable, boundaries can feel like self-sabotage. You may push through exhaustion, delay rest, or tell yourself that you'll recover later after you get promoted. Money boundaries. I want to slow down here a bit because money boundaries sit at the center of a lot of what we've already talked about. It's not just a practical resource. It carries meaning, things like safety, worth, choice, pressure. So when money boundaries leak, it rarely is just about dollars. It's about what money represents. For many people, money boundaries are shaped early, sometimes through family dynamics, what was spent, what was withheld, what caused stress. Because for many people, money does not register as neutral. And this is where money boundaries get complicated. Because when safety is involved, the nervous system prioritizes short term stability over long term sustainability every single time. You might notice yourself staying underpaid because it feels less risky, accepting misaligned roles because income feels non negotiable, overgiving financially to maintain peace or connection. Talking about money can activate fear, guilt, or urgency. Another major influence on money boundaries is the way worth becomes tied to productivity or sacrifice, and it happens slowly. The message is not always you're only valuable if you produce. It's more subtle than that. It sounds like being praised for pushing through exhaustion, being rewarded for doing more than what was asked. Over time, your system learns something very specifically. My value increases when I give more of myself. One of the most common money boundary leaks is guilt. People will undercharge, overgive, or stay in unsustainable arrangements because guilt feels more familiar than security. Money boundaries are not about becoming rigid or withholding, they're about ensuring that exchange does not destabilize you. If earning, spending, or giving consistently leaves you anxious, depleted, or resentful, it is not a mindset problem. It's a boundary problem. And just because you can pay or help or absorb a cost does not mean you should. Capacity does not equal consent, and money boundaries exist to protect that distinction. Reclamation does not happen through force, discipline, or motivation. It happens the moment you decide you're no longer willing to trade away. I want to close this learning by offering a few statements. When we say, I relate to my life in a way that preserves my energy, not depletes it, we're reclaiming the right to sustainability without apology. When we say, my signals are valid data and not obstacles to override, we're repairing self trust. When we say, I'm allowed to pause before responding, we interrupt urgency conditioning. We create a space between the stimulus and a response. And this space is where boundaries live. When we say my capacity is part of the equation, we undo years of conditioning that are taught us to exclude ourselves from decisions. This is how energetic boundaries are built. Reclamation is the decision, and support is how it becomes real. This session is an orientation, a way to name patterns, build awareness, and create a point of reference you can return to. The deeper work happens through structured tools and practices designed to help you stay with yourself under pressure in a way that respects your nervous system and timing. If you feel ready to continue, there are many resources available at truepathco.com, including workbooks, courses, workshops, guided practices, and more. For those who already know that they work best through direct conversation, there's also an option to explore working with me one-on-one. Choose what feels aligned, explore at your own pace, and build a life you can truly thrive in. On Tuesdays, I share new content. I have a Spotify channel, a free resource tab on my website, and a YouTube channel. You choose the platform that works best for you. Each session is around 30 minutes and a gentle way to stay aligned, grounded, and supported, with a variety of topics from holiday seasons to relationships and career, or whatever else life throws at you. Upcoming sessions are From Overwhelmed to Action on January 20th, Self-Trust as Strategy, January 27th, and Stability, Not Stagnation on February 3rd. Your feedback shapes these sessions. I invite you to share your insight so I can build each week around what serves you best. Thank you for being here and practicing awareness in real time with curiosity. I'm Tara Palazzolo of True Path CO, and until next time, let your inner compass guide you.